Okay, and water, no vodka. This needs to be recorded. Yeah.
A lot of running around in this.
Got it.
This is why we have media people.
Okay. All right. So, sorry about that. Don't watch our knees. Is everybody tuned in now, Colin? Thumbs up. All right. Welcome.
We're back.
Version 3 of Pitch Me on the Patio.
Version 3, trying to get to version 30.
That's right.
And then maybe 300.
That's right. Yeah, I think we're going to start with this and we'll just keep going from there.
Some scale.
Very nice. Yeah. So we're going to do a quick round of introductions. We have our guest Bob speaking with us today, and I'll let Bob introduce us himself last. Nasim, I'll do a really quick introduction of me. Colin, Christensen, EIR at MacEwan University. Really cool opportunity for me. Entrepreneur, lots of businesses. That's a whole other thing. Run an accelerator, do some micro lending, social business, a little bit of everything. We can talk more about stuff later. Nasim, why don't you? You're more of a showcase in this case.
I don't know about showcase, but sure glad to be here again. I'm the Allard chair for 2021 at the MacEwan School of Business. I run 3 companies on the for-profit side, so that'd be Williams Engineering, Umbra Engineering, and DB Technologies. And I also chair Innovate Edmonton. I do a bunch of governance work, corporate governance work, and this is part of my contributions, I would say, to the Allard chair for this year in terms of how we connect business to business and advance what the students can be doing, we should be doing over at MacEwan University. So happy to be here. Happy to drag Bob along too, to be one of our special guests. And so I'll let you introduce yourself, Bob.
Yeah. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bob Black. I'm a lawyer, partner at MLT Aikins law firm here in Edmonton. It's a firm that's a Western Canada-based firm with 6 offices across Western Canada. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been involved in all manner of different kinds of things. I've had 3 very distinct and equally fascinating chapters in my career. I'm sitting here today at the age of 62, and I am as pumped as I've ever been. I'm involved in all sorts of things that truly inspire me. And fundamentally, I'm an unabashed city builder. I think it's Edmonton and the Capital Region's got tremendous untapped potential yet, and I'm excited and engaged about collaborating with people to make things bigger and better.
This is fascinating. This is great. So we're here talking about business. The whole point of this Pitch Me on the Patio was not so much for pitches, although that's kind of cool, but really we're trying to take the Allard chair and the EIR and meet amazing, fascinating people in the city that have been around, that know what's going on here, and talk a little bit about business. Hopefully our audience, being entrepreneurs and getting started and students and everything in between, get to hear a little bit from some seasoned expertise, a young 62 and I think 39.
Going on 39.
Yeah. And I just had my birthday. I just turned 54. So I got to, a little bit of gray hair around the room anyway. But, we get to hear from some experience and talk a little bit about business and some of the things that we've experienced. So hopefully the entrepreneurs can get going. Like you had said, Nasim, we want the entrepreneurs to start doing something. And hopefully, in my mind, I always think of getting off on the right foot. So today, you're going to talk a little bit about, give us a little bit of a story, and then we'll start building on some questions, and I'll probably go off for a little while. I'm always very curious about this stuff, and then we'll take some questions from the audience as well.
All right. Well, by way of brief bio, I've been a lawyer for 38 years. I have had 3 very distinct chapters in my career, as I said. First 25 years, I was a litigator, dealing with all manner of complex claims in all levels of court up to the Supreme Court of Canada. I'm proud that at a relatively young age, I was appointed to the Queen's Counsel, and really enjoyed that chapter in my career. Thought I was a lifer in it, one day Daryl Cates called me up and asked me if I would become his executive vice president of sports and entertainment. And I pivoted it immediately, resigned my partnership the next day, and joined the Cates Group and the Owners Entertainment Group for 10 years. I was a member of the negotiating committee for the successful public-private partnership between the City of Edmonton and the Cates Group on the funding for Rogers Place. Thereafter, I was placed in the role of being responsible for the execution of the design and construction of Rogers Place. I was as well a member of the Management Oversight Committee on the design and construction on the JW Marriott Hotel. I spent time being a media spokesperson, handling media relations, generally strategic communications, public relations for the Cates Group. Got to the point where I didn't have anything immediately on my horizon. That was another big project to build after phase 1 of Ice District. And so I pivoted again. I went back into private practice, and my practice now is focused on city building initiatives, including the vision for the Prairie Sky Gondola, a couple of cultural districts that I'm working on building within Edmonton city limits. And really importantly, I have got a very direct focus on Indigenous nation building. I believe that we're at a watershed moment in Canadian history where it is very much an emerging consensus amongst Canadians that we have to move into a more just and equitable relationship with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. As a Canadian, I've always been very proud, but I've also been very conscious of the black mark against our collective conscience as a result of our historic, longstanding, systemic mishandling of our relationship with our Indigenous peoples and all the injury that's been brought to bear as a result of it. I believe that now is a time where things can change. I am unabashedly a believer in Indigenous self-governance, but that requires creating the mechanisms of government, including economic independence. You cannot be capable of exerting your sovereignty in a circumstance where you're economically reliant on another order of government. And so today, as we sit here, we are embarking upon a really, really interesting chapter in Canadian history from my perspective, where there's opportunities to do paradigm changing things. And, you know, when one gets to my stage in my career, one gets to be a little bit more selective as to what they become involved in. And I'm inspired by the opportunity to do things that haven't been done before, to be involved in things that are paradigm changing in nature. And I believe fundamentally in the power of the big idea and the boldness to assemble consensus around ideas and put skilled people together to execute on big ideas. I fundamentally believe that there's power in the big idea, and that we shouldn't shy away from it.
That's awesome. Huge part of MacEwan is, you know, some of the Indigenous. From what I understand, MacEwan has more Indigenous, a higher percentage of Indigenous students than anywhere other university, which is pretty cool. So that's a big important part for us, for sure.
It sure is, and that capacity building within Indigenous communities is such a vital piece of that movement towards sovereignty and self-governance. And that doesn't mean, you know, building enclaves that have walls around them, but it does mean creating an environment of economic reconciliation that then allows for partnerships with the broader Canadian public. And I think we're going to see some really, really neat things happening on that front.
So how do you start? Where does that start? Like, you know, you talked about kind of building economic systems and economic independence, but how does that all? Where do you even begin with that? I mean, we're talking 300 years worth of background here, but and then of course our interruption, if you want to call it that, with the you know, with the immigrants coming into the land and starting to change a lot of that. political challenges of all over the place. But how do you see this kind of starting to play out?
Well, I think that fundamentally it starts with a profound change from what has been. What has been a circumstance where the Canadian government, in what more recently has been typically a well-meaning process, but still a very patriarchal process, has been creating programs around its perception as to what Indigenous nations require, and then creating programs which are typically underfunded and layered with all sorts of bureaucracy, and leaving the nations to their nation building exercise based not on what their aspirations are, what they believe their opportunities are, but rather upon what grant programs they can pigeonhole themselves into. And invariably, because those programs are underfunded, it leads to competition between communities. I think the opportunity is to press stop on that and instead focus on the visioning processes, which are really truly driven by the aspirations of the nation, the perception of the nation as to what their opportunities are, what the DNA has to be of any development in order to express their language, their history, their culture, and then to find novel solutions as to how to create the path to actually making those projects a reality. And so it's a real change from what historically has been into a new nation-driven model, and so it's very, very compelling, and I think we're going to see some profound changes that will come from it.
It's such an interesting thing. Like, I have a massive hope around entrepreneurship, right? I think because entrepreneurship, aside from anything we know today, if I was to look at entrepreneurship at some point, some guy, whether it's Indigenous or just, in Europe or Asia somewhere, they said, I need to feed the family, right? It could be through an avenue of farming. It could be something, but there's an element of trade that kind of happens in there, right? I have something that I'm good at, boot making or, farming or whatever it is. I want to trade with you, and you have a talent that I need, and together we can maybe benefit one another, whether it's an exchange of money or just an exchange of talent to make sure that my family is looked after and your family is looked after. So if I take entrepreneurship and break it down to that, right, that's where I think it starts. Yes, at some point, I could go and get a job if I want to, or I can start something of my own because I have a certain set of talents or abilities, right? So when we're talking about reestablishing or recreating kind of the nations from the Indigenous perspective, but there's an element of the societal side as well as the independent entrepreneurs inside of that. How do you see those pieces fitting together?
Well, ultimately, you've got to create an ecosystem where individual entrepreneurs can flourish.
Right.
And that requires a number of pieces. It requires an environment in which they have opportunity to have pathways for success. It also requires, in the case of Indigenous communities, in many instances, capacity building and supporting and nurturing, in particular, of young Indigenous entrepreneurs. And so, it's that therein lies one of the challenges to get right is that, getting monies into a community is only really truly successful if that money gets down to the grassroots of communities where it can have a real impact and create pathways to intergenerational wealth. And so, I'm fundamentally a profound believer in entrepreneurship. I've had the opportunity to work closely with government on projects such as Rogers Place. And government's really good at some things. Government's really good at process. It's really good at consultation. It's really good at due diligence because it put a lot of horsepower behind things. But the success of Rogers Place, from my perspective, was very much a product of of combining that with good old fashioned private sector deal making.
Sure.
And you look at the public-private partnership. It's a real clash of cultures in a significant way. As a private sector entity, you make money by identifying opportunities and moving with rapidity to capitalize on. Whereas the public process is all about slowing down the process, layering on a bunch of public consultation, a bunch of due diligence, and it doesn't have the nimbleness that the private sector has. In the public sector, it's all about risk transfers. And typically when you're negotiating public-private partnership, it's all about the risk transfer from the public back to the private. And of course, the private sector manages risk. It mitigates it, and it assesses it and mitigates it. But at some point, the risk transfers can stop making sense.
Right.
And so that becomes a difficult balance. In the public sector, there's a fundamental suspicion of private profit, which always kind of rattles me, because as a private sector entrepreneur, I know that capital is mobile. And in the absence of a profit motive, it's not going to get invested. And so there's a whole bunch of pieces that go into, to crafting that public-private partnership in a way that allows the strength of both the public and the private sector to be realized. And that takes some thinking outside the box.
You mentioned my favorite word, which I was hoping we'd get to sooner than later, which is you said deal making, but essentially the deal itself, which is the most complex part, whether it's a private-public partnership or it is an entrepreneur winning their first PO. It's a deal, and that's a big part of entrepreneurship, and part of the reason why that we're all here doing these sessions. Last session which was on building a team and some basic HR maybe at the most. Before that was all about sales. But what we're trying to get to is how do entrepreneurs make deals? Now you're making deals. You and I have talked lots about the ICE district deals, which are in the billions in terms of economic impact. The entrepreneur is trying to win their first PO from whoever it is they can, and that art of the deal, I hate to use those words together necessarily, but it really is that art of the deal. How does that entrepreneur sort of go about resolving all the fine prints? And you and I have spent a lot of time together going through documents about deals, and we work together on some things, but there's a lot of their paper, our paper. Let's get to a deal. How do we get them to a deal? Different interests. They're trying to move risks down, and we're trying to absorb some of those risks, but to get a return on that risk. Or how do you get to that deal? How do you get to the deal? Right? And what does that path look like as you get closer? And I'll cry later on because I lost a deal this week. We were acquisitive. Trying to acquire another company, and it went to zero this week. And there's also that side of it, which is that hurt.
Yeah.
But let's talk about how do we get to the deal. I think because I think it's a big part of today is it's finance, but there's nothing to finance unless there's a deal, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting because of course it's different in all deals, but I think that there are some fundamentals. From my perspective, the time up front in terms of conceptualizing where you're trying to get to, and doing all the necessary research to really understand what your opportunity may be, and how you identify your risks and mitigate them that due diligence piece is massive, and it can't be underestimated, because at the end of the day, as a negotiation rolls out, there are points along that negotiation that if you've done your due diligence, you are ready for in a way that the other party may not be. And if you can conceive of a strategy. That doesn't mean it gets fixed in stone, but you do need a strategy that you can continue to assess and modify as the negotiation goes along. But ultimately, deals are all about creating a consensus. They're all about creating a win-win. And so understanding the other party's objectives and understanding their strategy to the extent that you can, and then finding a pathway to marrying up interests, creating common interest is, from my perspective, the magic. It's the pathway to both parties really embracing the opportunity. So, for example, on the arena and more laterally on Prairie Sky Gondola project, in both instances, we've had a very deliberate process to understand the strategic objectives of the city of Edmonton, to understand what its needs and aspirations are, and to tailor our process to meet those, so that we become, in that instance, the vehicle for them to achieve their aspirations. And if you can get to that place, then that deal making has a whole different look to it.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, because the way I look at entrepreneurship is, well, I define an entrepreneur as somebody who delivers a consistent solution to a well-defined problem. Right, that's my very simplest terminology for a term of an entrepreneur. So Prairie Sky gondola project, right? There's an outcome that you're looking for.
Yes.
And it happens to align with, and probably, and at some point anyway, with the city.
Yes.
Right. And that's where the entrepreneurship is. The entrepreneurship is, we have a solution for a problem that you're experiencing, and we think we can solve it. You have to know what you want out of it. You have to know what they want out of it, and they have to know what you want out of it, right? And
yes,
and everybody kind of figures it out, and then that's where the deal starts to come together, right? Isn't that so? Do you find, I guess, in that, I mean, the question I could come up with out of that is, do you find that most entrepreneurs, when they're kind of diving into a deal, they don't have an understanding, or they do have an understanding of the outcome that they're looking for?
I think successful entrepreneurs typically will have a very clear end game in mind. And that doesn't mean that things don't evolve times in ways that take you by surprise, that close doors or open new ones. Because it's as you get deeper into things, new opportunities reveal themselves, new obstacles reveal themselves. But I think having clarity of vision as to what you're trying to achieve is fundamental. And I also believe that surrounding yourself with the most talented group of people you can never set you on a bad foot. The reality is that we all have things we're good at. And we all have ideas of which we are passionate. But it's really when you begin to test those ideas with other people with good ideas and passion that you can build something much bigger than what you started with. I've always believed that your best opportunities come when you've got an all-star team around you. And I say that because I've always been a sort of a strange combination of a apex predator and a pack animal, because I am driven, and I've got a very clear vision as to what I want to do, and I've got the assuredness to get out in front of things. But that having that opportunity to collaborate, there's just so much power in it. Because if you are alive to the opportunity to keep on learning, and you embrace the opportunity to have your perspectives challenged and refined, you're going to get to some place that is much more powerful from my perspective.
It really is. I mean, you've got typically two sides to a deal. There could be easily more sides to a particular deal. And but when the other side looks at your team and says, not only do they have a good idea or a solution to what it is that we're trying to solve, but they also have the capacity to execute, which is around the team. Confidence is built, trust gets created, and then they feel like that you're actually going to be the proper solution for that. I think a lot of time entrepreneurs, especially ones that have a great idea, maybe don't even have a really big team yet, they got a great idea, and they go and somehow try to test it in the marketplace. They're constantly getting shut down because, well, you haven't done that before. Like, have you sold anything yet? Right. Like, how many widgets have you sold? How much of your product has you sold? How well developed is your service offering or your product offering that you have? Have you ever done it before? Like most people don't really care if the kid comes up and says, "Hey, I'll mow your lawn for $20." He's never mowed a lawn before, because what's really the big damage they're going to do other than run over over the flowers, maybe, which is, maybe my wife would be really pissed with that. But actually probably I would be even more. But we're always looking for competency in terms of being able to assure ourselves that the deal is actually something that could go beyond what it is. If you don't have that competency behind you, you're just simply not going to get there.
Couldn't agree more. I really fundamentally believe in being able to demonstrate capacity to execute. Because ultimately negotiations are all about creating trust-based relationships, and trust impacts negotiations in many regards. But fundamentally, if you're negotiating, the other side's got to believe that you have the capacity to deliver on what you say you're going to deliver on, and that goes right to trust too. And so there's lots of aspects to trust, but that is a fundamental one. And that really, from my perspective, requires being very thoughtful of who you surround yourself with, and how you create a set of complementary skills. Because we all tend to have niches that we're really strong in, and some of us are more generalist than others. But subject matter expertise is a big piece in success, and that very often is multidisciplinary in nature, and therefore requires experts from different fields.
So, I mean, in some ways, what you're saying, and I couldn't agree with you more. Trust is such a core component, and trust comes from delivery on top of it all, or the ability to execute and deliver. So a lot of the young entrepreneurs come into the program, come into the world with a great idea. I got a solution, and it's going to be amazing. One of the problems I have is that they're not asking enough questions to understand if it's really a problem, or what the elements of the problem are, so they could, when they actually say it, they say, well, I understand the problem. If you can say I understand the problem and explain it, then the solution becomes a little bit easier for people to come, oh, okay, this guy actually knows some of that. But then you have to build a team. So I have the capacity to be able to carry this out. So as an early stage entrepreneur that we might be watching here, for both of you guys, it's one thing to say, I got an idea. Where do you start? How would you figure out some of those first people to bring in to really demonstrate your ability to deliver on this? Is it a technical guy? Is it somebody who understands the market well? Is it somebody who's connected well to somebody else, or who can vouch for you, or a mentor? How would you start to build that from, on any kind of a deal, from the very core elements up?
It could be, and probably is, all those things. But fundamentally, and I'd really be interested in your thoughts on this, Nasim, but it seems to me that where it starts is, again, that due diligence piece, really understanding the pieces that will go into the journey from taking that to an idea to something that you can execute on. And that really fundamentally requires a deep dive into risk.
Where the risks
are, where your challenges are, what obstacles that you're going to have to surmount, And in combination with really, in a very thoughtful way, looking carefully and with very clear eyes as to what the opportunity is, not getting romanced by upside projections, taking a very thoughtful approach to a risk managed assessment as to what can be achieved. I think that process, from my perspective, begins to illuminate where you need help. It begins to illuminate what kind of partnerships or relationships you'll need to build in order to keep you on that pathway towards execution.
I learned a lot from traveling and around the world, and even in business. I think the things I appreciate the most is when I meet somebody that looks like that they're going to turn over every rock that they've ever seen in order to be able to get your business or to create a business, that's willing to put in all the time and energy and is just a firecracker to make things go, and that can prove to you that they're reliable day after day and can come back to you with all the things that you might be looking for, whatever those asks might be. That drive from that individual that is going to do what they said they're going to do, and you just start to believe them because you actually build trust with that individual. But when they drop the ball, so use the lawn mowing example, if you hire the kid for $20 to go mow your lawn this week and say, next week, 9 o'clock, Saturday, there's not $20 for you, come do the lawn again. If they show up at 9 o'clock and they mow the lawn and ask for the fantastic, okay, now do it again.
Right. Yeah.
And next Saturday, it's another $20. Okay, well, now you have a business because now you're reliable, because I got a problem, which is I hate to mow my lawn. And this kid likes to mow lawns and needs to make some money. So it's that sort of repeatability and that trust and confidence that you get from somebody that it shows up to, whether it's a new piece of software or it's the kid that's going to mow your lawn. And we see that in some of the guys we know. Jeffrey's one of those guys, for example, that just shows up and is like in. We want to see people that are in and that are going to be able to execute. And you kind of pass on the team for a while to a certain extent, but looking for drive. Yeah, we really are looking for drive because I got a problem, you got an answer, you got that solution for it. I think that's missing is capital and energy. Throw those things in there, and if he's got the energy, you can find a capital.
I like that a lot, Nasim, and as I look back on my career, I know that the things of which I am most proud in terms of the things that I've achieved have come in very substantial part through a combination of people seeing me as being passionate about solving a problem, and people having the level of trust in me that I can solve it. And so that passion piece, it speaks in commitment, it speaks in reliability, but really the capacity to inspire somebody to land in a place where they believe that you will solve their problem. That's where the magic lays, because ultimately, so much of entrepreneurship is solving problems. And if that's laced with a level of creativity where you're coming forward with novel solutions to problems, there's even more power in that.
Absolutely, and that kind of goes to the differentiation piece in terms of what's the competition in the market look like. If there's two kids showing at your door, and one's going to mow the lawn for $20, the other will do it for 19. I'm going to pick the one that's going to do a better job. So they're both knocking on your door, and one doesn't show up. So that market, it's going to eventually, is once you have that right idea, the market's going to decide for who gets to actually win the work, and it's going to come down to their ability to do it at a reasonable cost, not the lowest cost, a reasonable cost, with the highest possible quality for that cost. With some kind of repeatability and some kind of sense of trust that they're not going to, run the lawnmower over over whatever flower there's in the garden. and keep on coming back. And that's what we all care for.
It's so interesting. I mean, Bob, you said this, and Nasim, you alluded to it in even in this example of the lawn mowing. I'm an entrepreneur. I love it. And I've run several businesses over the years, and I think going back to it as I reflected, as you say it, it's always because, like, I'm fascinated even at my church. Everybody comes to me for figuring things out. So, Colin, what's going on with this? I'm like, I have no idea. But because I've developed myself as a person who knows, and solves problems, right? I'll figure it out. And I always do. And I think that's why, as an entrepreneur, it's not so much that you have talents in everything, because you can't. Have you possibly built a gondola system before? No, that's just it.
I'd never built an arena until I built an arena.
Exactly.
But I figured it out.
That's right.
And I figured it out by, again, making sure I had the right subject matter experts, making sure I had a plan,
Exactly.
and then being relentless in execution of that plan. And so I always love the opportunity to find a new challenge.
Right.
And I've been approached a couple of times recently with, can you do this from somebody? And I look at it and say, well, I've never done that before, but yeah, I think I can.
Yeah.
And the way I'll do it is I will do the due diligence. I will connect with people that know the subject matter.
Right. Yeah.
I will develop a strategy, and we'll execute it.
Right.
And that's really exhilarating stuff.
Totally.
If you can step into something that you've never done before, and do so with the confidence of your ability to do it, then the world's your oyster.
Well, and I think that's where it's actually fascinating, because it comes down to, it's not just a solution. I got a solution. Yeah, who cares? Everybody's got an idea. Everybody thinks they're amazing, right? But what it comes down to is the ability to solve big problems, right? And find the people who can, right? So you just become a trusted, well, even more so, an investable project, right? I know that if I give you money, you're going to figure it out. You're going to pull in the right people. You're going to work out the solutions. Whether you've done it before almost doesn't matter. Right? It's, do you understand the problem well enough that you can figure out how to bring the pieces together, right?
If it in fact is a problem that
Right.
needs to be solved, which is a big part, I think, of being an entrepreneur, is sometimes some entrepreneurs, you see a problem coming down the road X number of years from now and start working on a solution for it now, try to figure out how to sell it. When people say, well, that's not really a problem, and then it actually ends up being a problem, it's fantastic. Like climate change and rising seas. That's something most people ignore today, but there's a lot of money going to be dumped into the perimeter of North America to get it above water. But a lot of entrepreneurs, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs fail because they've got problems that they're solving problems that actually don't matter,
Right.
Relative to
So
what
true.
needs to be done, right? And so it's not really about capital, I think, is a lot of people that we know, I think, would say it's really not that best idea at all. Or in terms of priorities of ideas that could be monetized in some way along the way, it's not the best one that we would want to invest in today. It's one of these. And so because we've only got so much powder, we're going to put it all into the ones that are going to win the most. And these ones are just going to drop off the table until they really are problems or until they just disappear.
Well, that brings up the idea that, even for going for investment, right? If you're going to ask for money, some people say, well, yeah, but I only need $20,000. But it might not even be a problem we're solving, so it doesn't matter. It's easier sometimes to find 2 million or 20 million than it is to find 20,000.
The deal costs the same amount of money. So sign up Bob's team at Aikins to acquire a company for $500,000 or $5 million, same price.
Right.
It's just as much of a problem, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a lot more negotiating that that might be going on certainly in the background, but the paper on that deal is on the legal side is the same amount.
Right.
And so you might as well do the bigger deal.
Might as well.
And that's really interesting from the perspective of attracting capital too, because there is real truth to the fact that once you get to a certain level of project, you're just into a whole different stream of opportunity relative to acquisition of capital. And it's often easier to do the $200 million project than the $2 million project in terms of putting the money in place. And in fact, that it's perhaps even easier to do the $2 billion project over the $200 million project. And that's kind of counterintuitive, but it is true, and because you end up with progressively more sophisticated players who understand the mutually what each party needs in order to put the deal in place.
Well, going back to it though, I like even in that, all of that follows 2 billion versus 200 million versus 2 million versus 20,000, right? Though that continuum is a problem. But at every level, it still comes down to the same things: competency, right? It just so happens at a $2 billion level, you've got big players who understand and know that the competency of the developers is the same as the competency of the people funding.
Yes,
right.
We hope that they're more.
Well, we hope.
Well.
Yeah, we hope. That's true.
Always.
If you get a $20,000 guy trying to pitch a $200 million deal, yeah, problem. But then it's still going to come down to competency. Do you have the right guys in your team? It might not even be. I mean, yes, there's still. I have a little matrix that thing you can figure out if you have the right people on your team, and it gives you a score. Right. But a lot of it is, have they worked together before? Have they had success together before? Independently, have they had success? Right. Things like that. And you kind of go into it and it throws it all together. But it's measuring. A lot of it is measuring competency and, resourcefulness and the ability to do what you say they're going to do. So
there's I'm just sort of dragging on that point, the last point a little bit more. Canada is, as a country, has so many large billion-dollar projects over the last, since World War II kind of thing, that have been politically motivated in some particular way. So it's, in other words, the reason why you should do the project is not the reason why you should do the project.
Right.
And they just don't simply work.
Yeah.
There's lots of hydro facilities, there's lots of dams, there's lots of mining.
It's been a while. We should build another one.
Right. And, let's start out at 6 billion, they go to 12 billion, they go to 24 billion, they go, they do all those kinds of things. And so anyway, my point more than anything about this is that I think that there's a market for everybody. Maybe I'm in the $5 million range for deals.
Good point.
And that's where I'm going to spend my time, because my financial capacity or capacity to execute isn't any more than the 5 million.
Yeah.
And so play in your sandbox in that area.
Really good point.
$200,000 deals, maybe that's your place. Fine, but you get really good at those deals. And there's a guy I follow on Twitter that all he does is tweet about strip mall deals. Loves strip mall deals because of how well they perform. He knows his space, and I think that you kind of need to know where you're good and play in your own league to a certain extent, unless you can jack it up to the point where the team and the capital was big enough to be able to play.
Yeah, and I think that there's a process too as you evolve as an entrepreneur, and that starting in a smaller sandbox and being a standout within that sandbox positions you to move to the next sandbox, and that's just a reality of the evolution of an entrepreneur. I'll circle back, if I can, to understanding your subject matter. Think about the exercise that I've gone through over the last 2 years. As I said, I've always been a very proud Canadian, but I've always been very conscious of the black mark against our collective conscience because of our systemic racism in terms of our Indigenous peoples. But to become involved in working in that area has taken a tremendous amount of time for me to develop an understanding of the subject matter. And because, the last thing that Indigenous people need is, frankly, some white guy coming in and saying, I figured out your problem and let me tell you your solution.
Right.
It's got to be a much more nuanced process than that. And it really begins with taking the time to immerse yourself in history and culture, and to have a tremendous number of conversations with elders, with youth, with elected leaders, with hereditary leaders, and to listen, and to do everything you can to see things through an Indigenous lens, because that's where you can really start to come up with solutions that, first of all, you're collaborating on with Indigenous peoples, and second of all, that really go to the heart of their issues and challenges, but also that provide a pathway to their opportunities. And so, that's just an example, but you can't perform at a high level without taking the time to understand your subject matter. It's the same thing as when I was charged with the design and construction of Rogers Place. I went to over 40 arenas across North America and Western Europe, and met with everybody that I could to understand what their successes had been, what their failures had been, what worked, what didn't. Took every good idea I could from elsewhere, but brought it back and examined it through a lens of our local environments, and how to apply a learning from elsewhere, but create an Edmonton-based solution. Again, due diligence gives you clarity, and due diligence inspires confidence.
Just when you said that, it just reminded me that. I still believe I'm beginning my fifth career, if you will, along the way, and you're well into your at least your third, right? And it's, those numbers are always different for people, different what they do along the way. But remembering that you're always going to learn something new along the way, and if you might have to invest a significant amount of time into that subject area in order to be reasonably competent. It's so that reinvention of self that needs to occur as your career progresses. As an entrepreneur, business person, wherever you see yourself, lawyer, engineer, whatever, it's a constant sort of reinvention that needs to occur in order to be able to keep up with what's going on, right? Because so for a second, I want to overlay the exponential curve that we're in today in terms of how change, so digital change, is affecting us, right? And you could probably do the same thing to a certain extent, but there's an inflection point, with Indigenous people in Canada, where all of a sudden you need to be focused on that, whereas before we were ignoring it.
Right.
But there's this inflection point we're in today on a number of issues like that, where there's climate change, or Indigenous peoples, or how finance is changing, or energy transition, or you pick it, COVID, massive accelerator to our world today. All these things that are going on, we're on this exponential curve, which means you need to get ready to change again, and then get ready to change again, and then get ready to change again until you hang your skates up. That's just kind of what you need to keep on doing, because if not, you're going to get left behind real quickly by somebody that just finished university that understands all those sorts of things that we understand today, but is so much more in tune with the tools, the technology, the people, what's code, whatever.
What that comes down to, from my perception, is the inescapable reality that your success in a fundamental way turns on your credibility. And there are lots of people out there who talk of the game but don't have the capacity to execute, who very loud and wide about what they can do without having a clear and coherent plan as to how to do it, who haven't taken the time necessary to really understand the paradigm in which they're operating and how to be successful within it. You can never underestimate how quickly your credibility can be lost, but you can also never underestimate how your credibility, if carefully maintained, can propel you forward.
It's, being a little vulnerable for a second on that, I wonder if part of my desire to be an SME, a subject matter expert in a certain area, comes from my previous shames or whatever that might be. I hate not knowing what I should be knowing, right? you get in front of a client or you get in front of a person and you start getting asked questions and you just get completely undressed and you realize, oh my goodness, I know nothing. And hopefully you're only going to do that a couple of times, right? You go in front of somebody and you start to realize, you're the guy mowing the lawn, right? You're going to go and the guy like zigzags. My son's colorblind.
Can you see green?
Well, he can. But the funny thing is, when he mows the lawn, he'll leave patches because he can't see the difference, right? So he sucks for at mowing the lawn. Right?
He's gonna wash the car.
That's right. Wash a blue car or something so you can see all the dirt spots, right? But you know what I mean? I wonder at what point, like, that should drive us. I don't want to be wrong. I don't want. I know I'm okay actually now, especially now and being older. I'm not afraid of being wrong, but it also allows me to walk into a room extremely humble and go, you know what, I really don't know this area completely, but here's what I do know. And it's all of a sudden it becomes this great conversation because you're in a curious mindset rather than an authoritative looking like an idiot.
God, I love that word, curiosity.
Yeah.
I think that curiosity is a really, really important thing in terms of advancing your thought process on things. We all know people who have an idea, and that idea, is this big, and there's hard borders on that, and it can't and never will get any bigger than that. And as soon as they get out here, they're left in a place where they're just involved in conjecture and speculation, and pretending they know things that they don't. Those people lose credibility immediately. And so it takes courage to say that you don't know the answer to something. But if you can combine that courage with the demonstration of capacity to find out the answer and to create a solution based upon that answer, then you don't hurt yourself by saying, look, I don't know that, and I love you for framing that because I get it and it needs to be resolved. And you know what? I'm going to figure out how to resolve it and I'll get back to you. That's the sort of thing that inspires confidence.
It is, and so when I didn't grow up wanting to be somebody that was a president or CEO of the company. I didn't. This was not on my list of things to do. I had astronaut on my list,
Nice.
fire truck driver, GI Joe guy.
Garbage truck driver. I was going to be a garbage truck driver.
Well, one of these days we'll all get to drive the garbage truck still. I hope.
I know.
Because I really want to drive the garbage truck too. But when I literally found out overnight that I was like one morning I found out that the conversations happening that you need to be the next CEO and a bunch of reasons. I want to go into all the details about that. But one of the things I thought as when somebody said you need to be the president of this company was I needed to have all the answers.
Right.
Because you're the CEO, you're the top of the platform. Yeah. You're the top dog. You should have all the answers. So far from the truth in reality. And it gets back to the capacity of the team and knowing to be humble enough to know that I don't have the answer to that. So I'm just going to ask Bob. I'm just going to ask you. I'm going to ask Ian. I'm going to like who do I go to figure that out? And you kind of learn this sort of exercise of exploration, of asking good questions, especially about what the problem is. And there's nothing wrong with pushing back from the table and say, well, I got to go do some homework. So see you guys next week. I'm not going to give you an answer right now because that would be very dangerous. And it is. And you shouldn't have this expectation that and nobody should have the expectation about you either, that you have all the answers. Yeah. Because a great way to go broke really fast is to just leave this headspace in there and let you make your own decisions all the time without actually doing your own due diligence. So, what are the things that are going on? I should know.
Imagine the exercise, and I know you can, given your background, of being in the role of having to make the decisions on the construction of something as complex as Rogers Place. And so, my day was consumed with meetings from end to end. So, I'd have 10 meetings in a day. I'd start out with something on the experiential graphics. I'd then move into something on premium seating. I'd then move into something on the ice plant. Then move into something architectural in nature, and all day long it would shift from one subject matter to another, and making decisions on things that cost, in some instances, tens of thousands of dollars. In some instances, had $1 million implications. You can't do that without surrounding yourself with capable people, and really spending the time necessary to understand the subject matter, and have a thought process around how you are going to look at the thing in its macro level, but also the ability to get into the micro level as well. So what did I know about ice plants before I was involved in that? Very little, but it was necessary to learn enough that I could make an informed decision. And that took, surrounding myself with capable people, asking questions, being curious, taking responsibility for understanding it with the clarity necessary to make the right call.
It's this interesting freedom that comes when you hit that spot, I think, right? You become completely comfortable with not knowing anything, in a sense, right? We've all heard the term before. We've all heard the term before of, the more I know, the less I know, right? But for some reason, early stage entrepreneurs often don't have that. And so they walk in thinking they know everything. And the old guys in the room look at them and go, seriously, but how do you help people get that freedom to be able to go, yeah, I really don't know anything. Because we think maybe the gray hair sells it or something, but at some point that's ultimately what you have to do. Like you said, I need to know everything, to all of a sudden the next day you figure out, I don't need to know anything, I just know how to fix it.
I think the easiest place to start is probably work with more female entrepreneurs than males, because men mature later.
Great point.
Quite a bit later than the women do. And,
6-year-old in a grown body, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think that's maybe part of it, but start with the women, because they I see that in my own kids. I got 2 daughters and a boy, and they're all university age, and the girls are just so much farther ahead in so many ways. And you kind of wish I was at that age. It doesn't really matter. I guess they'll catch up with each other eventually.
Yeah, we give the responsibility, when my wife and I go away, we give it to our 15-year-old daughter instead of the 19 and 17-year-old boys. Just follow her rules, and she'll know how to deal with all of this.
That's beautiful.
So, okay, this is a question from the audience. Is entrepreneurship nature or nurture? And either one. Can we teach it? But this is kind of a discussion of it. At some point, it had to come. But did I learn it beforehand, or did I figure out that I'm an idiot earlier or later in life? Right?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that successful entrepreneur has certain fundamentals, and those are in reality gifts you're born with. But can you learn and refine your skills as an entrepreneur? Absolutely, you can. And there's just so much to gain. I look back on my career, and I've been so fortunate to have really great mentors. And sometimes you think about a mentor being somebody older than you, but that's not necessarily the case. It's just somebody who's got insights you don't have, that is prepared to take the time to spend time with you to help you along in your path. And so you know, I'll say plainly that my successes have throughout the entirety of my career been contributed to by others in a very fulsome way, and because of that, you have an obligation to give back too.
100%.
And so, you know, whenever I talk to a young lawyer or a young entrepreneur, and the question of mentorship comes up, my perspective on it is always the same, which is, yes, I'll take the time to mentor, but I want a commitment from you that you will in turn take the time to mentor others.
I love that.
And that's a reasonable thing to ask of people.
I think so.
If you're going to spend time, you know, trying to assist them on their paths, you know, in that way, you're perpetuating something.
You're nurturing.
Yes.
You're nurturing them, and you're expecting them to nurture further.
Exactly, because that's how you really build something powerful.
Yeah. What do you think, nature or nurture?
It's a depends here. How's that for a crappy answer?
It's the only answer,
Because
really.
it really depends on what you got out of the box.
Yeah.
And to Bob's point, you know, you can come out of the box, if you will, you know, at 14 or 19 or wherever you are, and have some innate skills, some of those basic things like that you've learned either from your parents or they're just built in part of your DNA, and you can build along those things. You need to be able to have those things like drive, like to be trustworthy, to show up when you said you're going to show up, for example, right? And if you don't have those things, you can learn those.
Yeah.
You know, I know people that are on a team I won't mention, but it's not got to do with anybody here, where that person's well into their 50s and still actually haven't learned self-accountability.
Right.
And that is, you know, and they're in a leadership role, and it's extremely damaging to the organization, where they can't actually, they don't see for themselves how destructive they are, but they could be absolutely amazing leaders if they just did that one more thing. Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, so I think the short answer is that it's both. You could, depends on your starting point. If you got a lot of the basic tools out of toolbox for an entrepreneur, you can build on that. If you don't have any of that, you can learn it with the right guidance, with the right kind of coaching and mentoring. And you can also go through life, you know, it's complete pie head.
Right.
And not learn anything, even though people are trying to help you and tell you there's something in there that says, you know, I can't learn that, or I don't want to learn that, for whatever my DNA is. And so it can happen on the other end too, where you just never learn.
Yeah. It's interesting. I often think that one of the most important attributes of an entrepreneur is like self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like self-awareness, but I think it also, and I keep bouncing around on this, curiosity or humility, right? Because there has to be a level where you go, yeah, I'm okay being not okay. In other words, right? I'm okay in realizing that I can't know everything. I don't know everything. And I really just need to learn it. And that's the curiosity, but there's also a level of humility. If I walk around thinking I know it all, I can't be taught anymore.
Well, yeah, you look at, especially I come from a world of technical people, right? And there's a lot of engineers who are super smart, high IQ people that are in that particular space, and if they sometimes struggle with that, you know, learning those other new skills, because all their life somebody's been telling them that they're super smart.
Right.
But
Simon Cowell effect.
Yeah, there's a, you know, a sort of pie chart, if you will, or a pie graph of competencies. And
right.
There's a whole bunch of slots in there, little pieces of pie that you got to check off to be fully competent in whatever role that you play. And if you're blind to that, to who you really are, what it is that you really want, what your purpose is as a person, what you like to do, don't like to do. I mean, as humans, we're constantly burying that stuff, so that, you know, that, and it actually slows us down, right? And so I like the word humility in terms of to be able to sit back and say, I just learned something. it's amazing. I had we have three students in our company right now in our Edmonton office that are elite students. So these are bright, young men and women, grade 11 and grade 12. We brought them into the company to just work on some engineering stuff. They haven't decided what they want to do. They want to be lawyers, doctors. None of them said they want to be an engineer after we went through the process. But after an hour and a half of just chit-chatting, I learned a ton. Because there's these Gen Z people along the way that I am so far removed from in terms of other than my own kids. So far removed from that you just realize, holy crap, I really want to hire all three of you in 4 years. Doesn't matter where you are because they're just super bright.
Right.
They're just on it.
And would you say do you think generationally, is there a higher degree of EQ now? Like with social media, playing into it, do you think that that's something, or for whatever reason, I suppose, maybe
I guess it's possible. My sense is that if they've got family, friends, either parents especially, or grandmas and grandpas around them, aunts and uncles that help them grow up through this process. I think some closer families that can sort of impart those skills on them, the things they learned, along the way, and they're receptive to them they can be. But if you're again, so back to the nurture piece, right? Just like kids, if they're not nurtured well, they could easily be serial killers like the rest of them.
Right.
Or what whatever you want to call it. I guess I could go down rabbit holes.
Yeah. I've got a whole bunch of jokes going through my head that I gotta just kind of quell.
So yeah, it really is. It is, and I think this is a big part of why we need. I think we need to pay so much attention to equity groups, that need so much more given to them because we've suppressed them over long periods of time.
Yes.
Indigenous people, Black community, people of color, women especially, so all those groups.
LGBTQ.
Absolutely, yeah. And because we kind of just have historically sort of discounted those people, but the amount that they could possibly add to the diverse thinking that needs to occur around the table, right? Come up with a better solution. We are idiots for not taking that. I love that.
Me too.
Because the reality is that we tend to be creatures of our own perspective.
Yeah.
And growth and the illumination of opportunity often comes from being outside of your own perspective.
Right.
And
innovation happens at the outside of the industries.
Bingo. And so, the harnessing of talents of people with diversity is not only the right thing to do in terms of equity, it's the right thing to do in terms of achieving great outcomes.
Well, I think
so. That's just the reality.
And it's the right thing to do from a deployment of capital perspective as well.
ESG.
If you're just purely looking at a return on investment, trying to design a product that fits in, pick a place in Canada, in Winnipeg, Regina, Edmonton, Vancouver, whatever. If you actually don't have enough diversity around the table to design that product for that community, you're hooked.
Yeah.
Because now you're selling something nobody wants.
Right. I talk about to high school kids a lot, and even younger, junior high, and I've done a kindergarten class. That was kind of funny. I don't teach this at the kindergarten level, but that idea, it's like, okay, so if I get a whole bunch of, young American boys, under 18 years old into a room, and I want them to develop a product for an Asian female over 50, good luck, right? Like, but to your point, you have to, it's funny how excited we all got talking about diversity, right? But that's the thing, I can't possibly know everything. There's no possible way. And the only way to do it is the sixth blind man and the elephant, right? If you don't have people talking with one another, with this diversity of voices, you're lost in the dark, right? It's like, there's a saying that the one with the most information makes the best decisions. And the only way to get great decision or information is by having a lot of different voices, right? You're building, Rogers, you're like, okay, I need architects, I need, disabled people, wheelchair access understanding, somebody who knows how to build and maintain ice. There's like diversity in everything, right? there's so many different parts that have to come into play for that. So why are we so stupid in being so narrow in our view? Like, how can we help that? I mean, even the question, Indigenous people or anything, MacEwan's a school. How could MacEwan start teaching diversity better? Right? How can it start to open up the perspective that it's not just your own view? You have to look at everybody's view in order to get a better answer. Is there a way that you could start that?
That's a really interesting question. I'm not sure I know the answer to it because I've never framed it in quite that way. But you know, again, if you can get to a place where you become curious about each other,
right?
That's really where the learning begins. And so, you know, if you can get to a place where you provoke curiosity between cultures and between groups, then you really create a platform for dialogue, for learning, and for ultimately achieving understanding and for broadening perspective. But it really does start in my mind with curiosity.
It does, and then beyond that, then it's really getting that experience, right? So whether it's, you know, there's a new family from Ghana that moves into your community, figure out a way to go have dinner at their house, you know, it'd be fantastic. All of a sudden, you're going to figure out a whole bunch of different things that are going on around you. Right? And I think that, you know, I've done it more in the last sort of, I guess, 12 years, maybe it is, through travel, right? Take my kids. So part of my goal was to, in terms of raising kids, was we wanted to take our kids to post-conflict countries because we wanted to see what it was like. So this is what it was like 10 years ago, and they were bombing each other. And you can still see the craters. 2 years ago, our last trip, you could literally still see the craters in Sri Lanka where they were bombing each other. And you hear the stories. You see the military still in some places. It's a relatively safe country. But you tell stories, you hear things from different people. You go and cook with a family, you go and eat with a family, and you realize that, you know, a cauliflower, you can actually chop up a whole cauliflower, like leaves and everything, and eat it. You know, you just put curry on it and you're done. Like, it's all good.
I can't
right?
say that would be terrible. I eat curry on everything. Load up the curry. I mean,
Let somebody else cook for a while. Right?
Yeah,
You know, get those kinds of experiences. I think sharing meals with each other. It's biblical in a lot of ways, right? Because I mean, that was back. I forget which testament it is, but it is. I mean, you break bread.
Definitely old.
The Old Testament.
The more
break bread,
the more we allow ourselves to be culturally curious, the more I think we realize that fundamentally we are all the same in so many ways. Mm-hmm. But the differences between us tend to be compelling. Mm-hmm. If you'll allow yourself to be interested in them, there are opportunities to learn. And to broaden your own perspective. And, you know, we live in a global village. And, you know, the cultural projects that I'm working on in terms of creating cultural districts in Edmonton, one of which is seat of government for the Métis Nation of Alberta, are really, really interesting from the perspective of how do you create a cultural enclave within a city, and how do you do that in a way that doesn't have walls around it, but rather welcomes people in to become culturally curious, to have dialogue, to reconcile. You know, that's a really compelling thing to undertake. But you know, my vision for the city is I would love to see Edmonton become a place that is about equity and inclusion and celebrating in a real way diversity. Because there's such power in it. And you know, that diversity is always, you know, I reverted earlier to LGBTQ and Two-Spirit. You know, the relationships that I've developed within those communities have broadened my horizons in such a significant way. And there's a richness and a beauty to you know, perspectives that lay within in those communities if you open yourself up to them. And really that you use the word vulnerability earlier. Sometimes that means becoming a little vulnerable. Sometimes it means confessing you don't understand.
Right.
Sometimes it means having the resolve to ask a question that might feel a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But the reality is that I think Edmonton is a unique place. I think that we've got some real fundamentals around diversity and inclusion. I think we've got some challenges we've got to overcome. But I think that if we're thoughtful about it, that we can become a place that is about diversity and inclusion, and which is about maximizing the things that people of the diverse backgrounds can bring to your ecosystem.
Yeah. There's a big part of our strategy, well, I would say not in dollar terms, but in terms of thinking in terms of Innovate Edmonton around looking for entrepreneurial activities, innovation that works in all kinds of situations, all kinds of communities, because it's massively underserved. But if you can create opportunities to innovate that come from the experiences of others that we don't normally connect with on whatever level, then eventually you're opening that up to creating ways for either those organizations or those individuals or for the GDP of the region to take it up to a bigger macro level to grow the economy and in the process create a stronger sense of equity between everybody else around us, rather than what it is now. I'm not going to say that we're going to fix equity, but working at it is the goal. Should be to fix it, but it's going to take a bit.
So instead of just going after solving old straight white guy problems, we actually start solving problems for everybody.
There's a massive market for all kinds of equity communities, and those folks that are represented by those communities have amazing ideas, and they can serve those
so
markets.
Good, so good. Well, okay, so even on that, the whole idea of like micro niches, right? I always tell entrepreneurs as an EIR, right? I'm working with entrepreneurs. They're like, okay, well, how do I get to 5,000 or 50,000 customers? I'm like, start with 5. Go find 5 people that are going, where have you been all my life, right? Like, who are the people that just love what you do? Because and when it opens up that market of diversity, LGBTQ or Indigenous or disabled people, or however you want to say it, all of these different groups, they all have needs. If we can start solving for 10 or 15 or 20 of those, that's where it starts. Get your first customer and then start to grow from there. I love the enclave idea too. That's amazing.
But I think that's for your point here in this is that it's kind of like, for me, it's kind of like traveling, right? And, yes. So when you get off the train and sweet, what's one of my experiences? You get off the train, you have no idea where you're going. For some reason, my hotel isn't showing up properly on my cell phone. And you just end up wandering around, dragging a suitcase around, and you come around the corner and you go, that's really cool. Right. And they get that experience, right? Yeah. And so you should be able to get, to let yourself in or be asked in or whatever the case is. But that's the same thing I think would happen around those kinds of experiences in Edmonton here it is. But you walk around the corner, it's like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So I look at it through the lens of the reality that tourism has really evolved in a very significant way into experiential tourism. And so, the experiences that you described in Sri Lanka, or the experiences I had in the Amazon or in Nepal, those are immersive cultural experiences that really impact on your thought process, on your view of the world, and that really drives tourism increasingly, is that experiential tourism piece. But the reality is that the same thing applies with the broader Canadian public, the average Edmontonian.
Right.
If the average Edmontonian can interact with culture in a way that provokes curiosity, breaks down barriers, aids in the cause of creating a more equitable society, then there's fundamental good in that. And so, I think we all have responsibilities to try and leave a better place. And there's so many ways that we need to focus our attention in order to make things better. And one can't do all of them. I'm unlikely to be at the helm of solving a big environmental challenge. Although my mind, who knows what may come,
right.
and what path I may choose in the future. But I just believe so much in creating a more equitable society, and that doesn't mean necessarily creating a more equal society. And that's a nuanced thing, because at some level I really truly believe in a meritocracy, and so you reward people who are contributing, but you create an equitable playing field, so that everybody has the opportunity to contribute.
Yes.
And in some instances that means lifting people up. And we have to have the courage and the recognition of the societal value of lifting people up and putting them in a place where they have an opportunity to demonstrate their abilities and to achieve outcomes based upon them. And so, it becomes a really, really interesting thing. But I think that we have the great good fortune of living in a society where these are not crazy concepts. There's lots of places in the world that you start talking about these kind of things, the conversation doesn't last long. And so, when we look at ourselves as Edmontonians and Canadians, I think one of the things that we have to be grateful for is that we live in a society where these things become possible. And if they're possible, then there's an obligation to contribute to making them be everything they can be.
It really ends up being our superpower at the end of the day, I think, in terms of the ability to differentiate yourself sort of back to the marketplace, right? And I think it does. And but one of the things I want to actually love to touch on for a bit, and I don't want to go down into too many dark holes in terms of sort of finance, but the conversation today is, so far is we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about the deal, but then once you've got the deal in place, I think there's a lot to be said about how do you actually financially manage the deal, right? And so I'll throw out a couple of things just to start it off, which is, at the beginning of the day, really what you're looking for is you've got revenue, you've got expenses, and there's a bottom line at the end of the day. What to do with the bottom line, we can talk about, but fundamentally, trying to get an extra dollar of revenue is way harder than trying to get rid of a dollar of expense. Assets, attract SG&A, like you wouldn't believe. And so once we get entrepreneurs to the point with bright ideas that are participating in their community, now they got to manage the business while also managing growth, so subscribers and some of the things that you work on, or whatever that is, more customers, more revenue. Basically, it's always like more revenue, and then you add more cost to it. The next thing you know, you got more revenue, and you're still not making any money. It's like, what the hell is going on, right? And so I think it'd be good to kind of throw the ball around a bit in terms of once you got the deal and the deal is in place, then how do you proactively go about in big chunks? Because we're not going to talk about shred credits or accounting policy or the stuff that you hire good people for.
And we don't do it all in about 5 or 7 minutes.
I've
got
some great accounts, but sort of managing the day-to-day in terms of operations. And because I know you've had a lot of great experience on that big project at Rogers Place. There's a lot of sharp pencils flying around in order to make it go, right? And so let's spend a few minutes on that, keeping pencils sharp. Yeah, that's that's I think maybe my proudest accomplishment with Rogers Place is the cost per square foot that we achieved. And that was about throwing nickels around like manhole covers. That was about putting process and due diligence to every expense item, and looking for creative ways to mitigate expense. And it was in Rogers Place. It was really fascinating because there were design elements which we undertook that saved great money. So if you look at Rogers Place, it's got this beautiful stainless steel envelope on 3 sides of it. That was expensive. It's beautiful, and I'm grateful we had the courage to insist upon that quality of an exterior finish. But if you look at the east side of it, what's glued on is a private sector building. And if you look at that private sector building, what you see in the levels of it is that at grade, there are some entrances to the Oilers Entertainment Group offices and the casino. But in behind that is the loading dock for the arena. And so the ceiling for the loading dock of the arena is the floor of the casino above it, and therefore a split cost. The floor of the loading dock is the roof of a private sector parkade, and therefore a split cost. The north wall of the loading dock is the south wall of the community arena, and therefore a split cost. And so there are all sorts of things, and those are just 3 examples of about 20, where at the interfaces between the public project and the private project, we created savings through good architecture. But other big pieces are how you not only negotiate your deals in the first place, but how you make sure that your deals are adhered to. You hold your partners to their contracts, and you without hesitation pay what you're obliged to pay, but you don't pay more. And then it becomes a question of how you can leverage other partners. And so we technology partnerships with Rogers. We did Sportsnet's Club's partnership with Rogers. It was the way we insured it was different. The way the way we managed foreign exchange was different. The thought went into all those pieces, and so there was just this relentless attention to all elements of the cost. And you're dead right, Nasim. It's so often the case that companies get in trouble because they're focusing on the revenue line and they're not focusing enough on how to manage their expenses. And you've got to be rigorous in that area. But there's also a real opportunity to be creative in that area too, right? And so it's not all just accounting. It's out of the box thinking about how you can do things maybe a little different to save costs.
Well, you mentioned that earlier, even in the deal, right? Starting with the deal, there are motivations, outcomes that people are looking for. You've got the private group that are trying to have an outcome. You've got the public group that is trying to have an outcome, and you've got the users that are going to have an outcome. And being able to really dig in, be curious, be humble, be creative, try to put these pieces together. You just have to be willing to do the work to get there, right? Like if you're coming up with the north wall is going to be this, the south wall is going to be that. That's really digging into the due diligence and the looking at it and being creative, but understanding the outcomes, because I know that these guys are going to need that. What do we do with it? How could we do it in such a way that it'll benefit us as well? But then it's a shared cost, like things like that. So how do you kind of approach that? Like to kind of bring those deals together?
So, I think it starts with understanding the factors that are going to impact on your outputs, right. And then really doing the deep dive into those things, and revealing the opportunities that lay within them. And you have to do the heavy lifting. And again, you have to have the subject matter experts assisting you in that process. Now, a good manager drives those subject matter experts, holds them accountable, challenges them to be creative. Right. It can't be a passive receptor scenario.
Okay, you know, I want to build off that for just a second because it goes back to this idea how important it is to be not the smartest person in the room, right? And have the humility again and the curiosity to be able to ask a question that might be really stupid. But that's where the creativity comes from, right? Well, what do you mean it has to be that way? And they're used to, you know, engineers don't get in ruts at all, I'm sure. Right? And then
We're just born in a rut and just stay there.
Well,
you know,
I just got to say this.
Go.
This was one of the really intriguing things about working with somebody like Daryl Cates.
Okay.
Daryl is this remarkable combination of high intelligence, vision, relentless determination, and cojones.
Yeah.
And you know, the opportunity to work with somebody like that is a rare opportunity. But what Daryl did, in my experience with Rogers Place, was, as I look back on it, was really compelling because he was very resolute in what he was trying to achieve. And in a very real way, I was his hands on this thing, right? But it was his vision. And what he did was he just constantly challenged his team of executives. And at times the challenges seemed unreasonable. But what they really did was they provoked the maximum degree of creativity and, you know, dedication to the cause from his people. Like, I'll never forget, back in high school, I got the nickname Bubba. So I'm known as Bubba by people who know me for a long time, including Daryl. And at one stage, we had an arena design that had concentric semicircles in the bowl. And so the seating at the east end looked the same as the seating at the west end. And too late in the process, Daryl decided that what he wanted to do was convert it into 5 levels of clubs. And so that's how we got the 2-level Sportsnet Club, the 2-level Sky Lounge, and the theater boxes. I went to Daryl at that stage and I said, look, you got to understand, we're late in the design process. This is going to have budget and schedule implications. And his response, and I'll never forget it, word for word, was, Bubba, I'm just telling you what we're doing. It's up to you to figure out, how to fucking do it. Yeah. Right? And it got me to a place I never would have got to on my own. Because I had to come up with the creative solutions to make that happen. And so there's really something to be said for that. You know, like a good leader will challenge, right, the people that they're working with. And you don't necessarily have to know the solution in order to set a mandate or to create expectations and to push that creative process. And so, you know, there's a real lesson in that from my perspective, because, you know, speaking plainly, whereas I spoke a moment ago about how proud I was of the cost per square foot that we achieved, we wouldn't have achieved that without Daryl Cates pushing as hard as he was to maximize the scope.
Right.
And that is, you know, in the very essence of innovation. Yes, really, which is, you know, this is, I think, what entrepreneurs do the best, the marketplaces do the best, is they boil it and boil it and boil it and boil it until they actually have the best solution for that moment in time.
Right. It's not this big, it's this big.
Right. And you have to, because there are constraints. There are massive constraints in terms of what you can possibly do given the market that you're in at this point in time. And ultimately it's going to come down to just exactly how innovative you can be with that solution. You know, once you rub the sleep out of your eyes from that conversation with Mr. Cates, then it was like, okay, boys and girls, we got to figure this out. Right?
Okay, I have to call it. We are a little bit over, but oh my goodness, you guys, I'm sorry, we're gonna just cut you off and we're gonna go keep talking because this is really good. But this has been fascinating.
I've enjoyed it immensely.
Thank you so much for coming. Obviously, Nasim, always great having you here. We're going to do this again in a couple of weeks, on the 3rd, I believe it is. and we'll get things going from there. But thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us. We're going to do this more in the future, and we're alluding to kind of a second chapter, looking at possibly a name change and maybe a location change, but we'll see how it all plays out because it's been very well received. So
We're just going to be agile.
that's right. We're gonna figure it out. Daryl Case is gonna come in here and he's gonna tell us, no, you're doing it this way.
That'd be okay.
That'd be okay. We'll figure it out. Thank you, everyone. It's great seeing you.
Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate it.